Hi, and welcome to another installment of the Intentional Success webinar series. Today, we're going to talk about how to price the work you've never done before. There's some unknown things that we're doing, some things that are hard to figure out, and we're not used to that. We're not from that world. And now we're living in it, and it seems to be part of our day-to-day life. And rather than be perpetually surprised by all the things that are involved in the work that we do, and therefore our pricing turns out it wasn't really set up very well. I want to teach you some fundamentals about how to get your pricing set up for the things that you're unfamiliar with. There's a process and structure for doing these things, and hopefully this is going to help. Even if it just gets your next proposal in better shape, it's going to be well worth the time that we're spending here today. So if you are new to these webinars, welcome. Thank you very much for being here. I'm Tom Stimson. I'm president of the Stimson Group. I've been in the audiovisual live events industry for a really long time. I'm at the point now where I can honestly say I've been at this for 40 years. It doesn't always feel that way, but some days it does. So I've got a lot of background and experience, and I work with the owners and management teams of businesses in the live event space who are primarily in the production rental space, which is seeing a lot of challenges right now here in this pandemic crisis. Now, this webinar, why am I doing this webinar in particular? Well, most of you know that my webinars and things I write about and things I teach about were born out of my conversations with you. So as we're talking, we're processing a crisis, dealing with an issue, coaching you through a problem or an opportunity. I'm spotting trends, and one of the trends that I've noticed, and it goes all the way back to the beginning of the pandemic back in April and May, when we first started pricing streaming events, that a lot of us just don't know how to price things that doesn't have a line item and a market rate that we can refer to. So we're into some dangerous territory. And if we use our rental think, our ability to figure out how to make rental pricing work, how to accumulate line items and add labor to it, and cost all of those things out, if we apply that same methodology to creative work and content production work and pre-production work, what we end up with is a sum of the parts that is extremely expensive looking. And if we present it to the customer the way that we think about it, we look like we're pricing a car one part at a time. And it's no wonder people push back and say, oh my God, why is this so expensive? When you think you're actually absolutely giving it away, it's because what you're pricing in your head and presenting to the customer is quite different from what they're seeing on their side and what they are asking pricing for. So we've got to figure out how we can get that balance. And I think, there's a technique here I think that's going to help you quite a bit. So in justifying our math, okay, we leave out anything that we don't know, right? So we put together rental pricing. I don't know if we need this. I'm not going to put it in there. That's going to jack my prices up. I don't want the client to see that. And it's like, well, great, it's not included because here it's clearly not there in the quote. And so we try and put everything in the quote that we think needs to be there. But in production work, we often find we're responsible for the things that we didn't specifically say we would do or provide for, that it is somehow included in what normally happens when you pre-produce a video, develop some content, program or code a platform. There's a lot of things that are included in there that we can't itemize in a quote. So this is very much, and I couldn't be happier because we're talking about selling the end result and not the plan, which is one of my mantras. But we can't just justify our math, right? And certainly we don't want to show that work to the customer. So if we price the way we do in rental, we put all the parts and pieces in there, we check for completeness, we make sure we've got a good operational order, we check availability, then we sell it. And as we deliver, we can look at our delivery and see if it lines up, if all the costs line up with the line items we put in there. That surprisingly is not working in our streaming events world, because there's only a fraction of the work that we do in streaming events that this formula applies to. And in fact, it doesn't really apply to that. We're just getting away with it. So, how many hours is this going to take? How many parts and pieces? How many of these do we need to have? You know, who and what do I need to schedule? And these are all operational questions that we're trying to answer. And then we're trying to present that to the customer. And here's what it looks like. Honest to God, this is what it looks like to your customers. Say your car is broken, you're having trouble with it. Every time you go over 40 miles an hour, the air conditioning shuts off. So you take it into the mechanic. You have what is known as an undiagnosed issue. We don't know what's causing the problem. You tell me the air conditioning shuts off above 40 miles an hour. Let me take a look at it. Now, there's an industry that actually has extremely structured pricing, and it was just applied into, let me take a look at it. And how do you not understand this, right? Now, the rookie mechanic, somebody who's not worked in the industry and is not using industry norms for pricing, would look at your problem this way. Well, we're going to have to put it up on the lift, so I need to charge you for a repair bay. And I got a technician, but I'm going to need a helper. So that's a 4-hour minimum. And I got to have to hook up a diagnostic machine. And those things are really expensive. Do you know what those things cost? So I've got to hook you up to that. And then there's the tools that we're going to need. Well, you're going to have to pay for a lot of tools. I don't know which ones I'm going to need. So you need to rent this big toolbox. Okay. If you went to the mechanic and somebody talked to you like that, you would turn around and walk right out, because that's wrong. You're not solving the problem. You're telling people what you're going to use to figure out what their problem is. And that's very often how we're approaching in our rental think, that's how we're approaching some of these production opportunities. So to answer the question of what's it cost to fix my car, I'm going to share some experience, because I used to work in this business. I spent most of my high school and college years, being a car guy. I worked in I actually worked in junkyards and sold used parts. I worked in a foreign car repair shop. I bought and sold cars and parts myself. This is my hobby, and this also helped me put me through college. There's a methodology. There is actually a book of how long it takes to do anything on any car. When a manufacturer releases a new model of a car, and this goes back to the 60s, there's a book that says, here's how long it takes to change out the brake pads on a car. Okay. It takes 1.25 hours, man hours, and then each dealer can assign their price to those man hours, and there's a standard way of charging for those things. So if we need to replace the brake pads, and oh, by the way, that includes the clips and this and that, and we do the adjustment and all the things that go with it, I'll fix your brakes. Here's the price. So this is what's known as a rack rate. Okay. Air conditioning service covers most of the common problems. It also defines what it doesn't include. Well, if there's a problem with your compressor, it doesn't include that. If we find a leak, it doesn't include that, but we can top up your air conditioning, make sure everything's okay. Here's the price. Okay. It includes, we automatically replace this filter. We put a new cap on this valve, blah, 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 blah. And if you need this, here's a common problem. If you need a sensor, it's an extra $45. Do you want to go ahead and pre-approve that? Because that might be part of your problem, right? It's very easy to get a fairly accurate estimate out of a reputable and skilled car repair shop. Now, sometimes you go in with a really, really unknown problem where a fixed rate, rack rate solution is not going to get you any closer, or we can't guarantee that it's actually going to help. In which case, we're going to charge you for diagnostics. Okay? Now, for us, in our worlds, this is kind of like doing the design part of a job or a needs assessment piece of the job. It tells us what we're going to need later, and it helps us build the future scope of work of what actually needs to be done. Or maybe we don't go that way, and we find a different way of doing business. The deliverables, quantities of elements, allowances for unknowns, these are things that we put into an unknown problem diagnostic. Okay, here's what I can do. I won't spend 2 hours on this trying to find the rattle in your car, which is probably the most nefarious problem anybody brings in. My car makes a noise when this happens. And, you spend hours driving their car around and you can't reproduce the problem. So here's what it costs for me to diagnose that. Okay. I may or may not get a diagnosis. My diagnosis may be you're just hearing things, but here's what it's going to cost to do that. So with these tools, most car repair organizations and many other industries that we deal with are able to effectively price something for a customer based on knowns and unknowns. If we know these things, we can do this. Here's the limitations of what we can do. If there are additional problems that we uncover, we also have rack rates for that and diagnostic rates for those things. So now let's wander into how do we deal with show and event production, or dealing with doing shows versus doing production. Most of you guys are show people. I'm an old show person. I get shows. We sell something, and 3 months later, we load the truck and we go out and do the gig. We pack the truck up and it's all over. Awesome. Production work is we sign the agreement and all of a sudden things have to start happening right away, and they continue to happen for the next 3 months, and you don't actually get a break until you do the show. And then there's post-production work. And oh my goodness, this is such a different world for us. So let's unpack this a little bit. By the way, if you start to have questions on all this, please use the Q&A box. I see you guys have already found the chat. Knock yourself out. Say hello to everybody. But drop the questions in the Q&A and I will get to those as we chat. So show and event pricing. We typically start with the technical support. There's a timetable. We know how many days we're going to be on show site. Maybe we're going to throw a little money in for some planning or some meetings in advance, but it's a small amount compared to the rest of the job. We have the quantity-based elements, which is the equipment. We have minimal variables. There might be some overtime because we don't know what the agenda is, or we know what the agenda is and here's an estimate for the overtime. But at the end of the day, 90% of the time, there are no changes between what you sold the job at and where it starts and where it ends 3 days later. Most of you don't have significant or any change orders on 90% of your orders. And you like it that way. Production pricing, whoa, talk about difference. So I want to talk about content production in particular, because that's a lot of what we're dealing with right now that's really new to us. There are two types of content production. There's the things that you can create rack pricing for, and then there are the things that are unknowns, okay? Most content production can be built around rack rate elements. As a matter of fact, what I'm going to encourage you to do is to figure out, every time you have to price something, figure out how to convert that into a rack rate that you can use again in a similar situation and apply it over and over again. All right, so content production is a rack rate for the elements. It costs this much per editing hour. If I'm going to run an editing suite, I'm going to have to spend this. Oh, if I need to do animation, it's going to cost this. And then there's the quantity. I need to produce a 30-second video versus I need to produce 10 30-second videos. So once I know the rack rate of doing 1 unit of something, I can extrapolate that into quantity. And then I can start looking at, well, are there economies of scale in doing quantities, right? And these are not things that we normally get to see in our rental production environment because quantities of scale don't really apply. Now, unknowns in all of this, there's always unknowns in production pricing. There needs to be some sort of upfront diagnostics discussion so that we can get to a base set of elements so we can get the work started, which is key to all of this. I want to get the work started so we may be able to price something quickly so that we can begin. And then we have a process for uncovering needs as we go along and creating new pricing, which means I need a budget that's bigger than the first spend. So the client's overall budget becomes very important because I can't blow through that money without getting to the ultimate deliverable by overspending on doing the individual elements up front. So what are the deliverables? The quantities of the elements, allowances for the things that we don't know, and they are defined as that when you write a scope of work proposal for a customer. You have an allowance for the things that you don't know, we need to set aside a budget for the oh by the ways, or the upgrades, or the additions, or the extensions, or the surprises. Because again, once the client set a budget, we want to try and honor that budget as best we can. Now, how long it will take you to do it is not the customer's problem. Okay. Let me go back to the car example. If you've ever, probably not many of you have ever worked as a car mechanic, but what you'll find out, if you go work at an automobile dealership, for instance, and you're working as a mechanic, you get hired and paid by rack rates. Okay. The predetermined hours. So if a car comes to you that needs to have an air conditioning service, and there's 1.25 hours of service time allotted on there to complete the scope of work, that's what you are going to get paid for. You're going to earn 1.25 times your hourly mechanic rate for doing that job. If you get it done in 45 minutes, yay. If it takes you 2 hours, you're getting paid the same. Okay? Your production work works the same way. So learning how to do things well, learning how to manage your costs, avoid scope creep, avoid over delivering, and avoid too much learning on the job is how you keep your pricing in line. If you try and charge your customer for what it is that you don't know, your prices are going to go through the roof, and they're going to take their business somewhere else. So just a reminder, a lot of the needs for content or platform production unfold as the project develops. So you need to keep a buffer in there for the client, some undefined spend that they can expect to spend, or honestly, you can give it back to them. That will make them happy. And you don't want to predefine everything, because buyers' wants and needs are going to evolve as capabilities reveal themselves. Ooh, it would be, oh, can we do that? Yes, we can do that, but it will cost this much extra. Okay. And as they say, well, how can I make more impact on this video or this presentation? We could do this, we could do this, we could do this. Some of those things are not going to be included in their budget, right? So there's a lot of shopping that happens after all of this starts. So thank you for, I've got some questions coming, got some comments coming. We'll pause and take a look at those as we go. Let's deal with the big question here. The elephant in the room is, what is it going to cost? When you sit down with the customer and you start to do the needs assessment, and they say, well, we need this. We've done Zoom, but we want a different meeting environment. So we want a platform. They may not call it a platform. They call it something else. But you hear platform, and they need a platform that does this. The client wants to be able to do this. We want our users to do this. We want a registration system that does that. We want to do this with the stream during the stream. We want to do this with the record afterwards. And they start talking through all of these things. And you say, great, you mirror all that back to them. Here's what I hear you asking for. This is what you think is important. Here are the things that you would like to see if there's money available, if you have budget for it, okay? And the client says, yes, what do you think that's going to cost? Now, stop. The biggest mistake many of you have made, because I've talked to a lot of you, is a price just left your lips before your brain even engaged. Oh yeah, we should be able to do that. No, 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 no. Don't do that. Keep asking questions. The fact that they know that the fact that they know that they want to know what it costs means that you have them engaged. We can continue our discovery. Now, I'm going to give you some tips, and you won't be surprised to find out you need to ultimately give them an answer, but the answer has to be for a scope of work. And you don't have a scope of work yet. You have some ideas. So maybe it's a $50,000 to $150,000 range, or it's a $5,000 to $15,000 range, or it's $500 to $1,500 range. It's a big range right now. The client's not going to be happy. They're going to want you to narrow that down. You say, I can get you to a range, but let me ask a few more questions. So the answer is, of course, well, it depends, right? Maybe you can find a more elegant way of expressing that, but it does really depend. Your job in pricing is to eliminate as many unneeded variables as possible. So your additional questioning, once you've gotten to a kind of a baseline, you kind of see the shape of the job, you start asking questions that will help you eliminate variables that aren't needed. So pick the likely candidates. Is this important to you? Would you like, it's like going to the eye doctor. How does this look? A or B? Test a few questions there so you can start to tighten this up a little bit. And remember, everything they say no to just became an exclusion. This is something that you need to say explicitly is not included, or make it clear somehow that they don't have the option of adding that back in without it being a change order. Now, ultimately, you're going to take this information and you're going to get to a price. Right? Good questions will give you the information to write a scope of work. We are going to write a scope of work here in just a second. And then you can get your pricing. Now, how you arrive at your price is your secret sauce. This is another thing in unrentifying your proposals and your pricing is don't present pricing the same way that you would in a rental. And I'll show you how to do that as well. And then presenting it, how you package it, how you deliver the overall, here's what we're going to do for you. Here's the outcome you're going to have. Here's the price. Here's your options. That is your superpower. Right? That's when you can bring all of your experience to bear to present this in the best possible way, whether it's in a presentation, it's in a proposal, or both, or some other fashion. That's what you're working towards. Now, developing the pricing for a project has 5 distinct steps. Okay? First step is to write that scope of work, which is why we don't want to blurt out what we think something's going to cost until we have sat down away from the customer and started to write that scope of work so that we understand what we're quoting on. Okay? The next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the elements that go into there. We'll apply the costs, what it is going to cost us, not the customer, so that we can convert that into a price. So then we can take the scope and that price and we can write that proposal, right? So writing the scope, very important. You have to answer the questions, what are you going to deliver? What assumptions are already being made that's going to allow this to progress? What is the customer responsible for? Because the customer is always responsible for something, and you are not used to writing that into your proposals. Other than client will provide a hotel room or client will provide a meal. No, client's going to be responsible for some pretty big stuff. And if they don't want to do it, guess what? You could do it for them and charge them a lot more money, which is why we got to make it clear what the client's responsible for. Okay, that's where most scope creep comes from, because we didn't do a good job of defining the customer's work versus our work. And then at the end of the day, the customer gets to keep something, right? Even if all we're doing is a live stream, there's something that they get at the end, and it's a canned recording, the rights to continue to use it, whatever it might be. Anything that you create exclusively for them, they should generally get to create. If you create an animation, you do a logo build, you create a slide deck, those become theirs, and we can define all of those things that go into the scope. So the example I'm going to walk through today is a pre-recording for award recipients. One of the very first things that happened back in April and May, when events, a lot of graduations suddenly became virtual, was this rush to how can we have graduation completely distanced, completely virtual, and still give every graduate the recognition that they deserve. And it became into a lot of projects with tons of pre-recording. So we're not going to pre-record 1,500 graduates here. We're going to record 10 award winners, right? So we're going to, first of all, we have we're going to base our scope of work on a quantity of 10 finished videos. Each of the segment of the video includes an intro animation, and then a 30-second loop of a recipient in a video clip. Now, you can imagine what happened is we're going to announce the award winner. We're going to say a few things about them. We're going to roll some video. It's going to last less than 30 seconds, and I don't need a 30-second clip. I need 5 seconds and a nice loop so that we can fade out after 8 or 12 seconds and move on to the next thing. So that's all been planned out in our discussions with the customer. In order to do this, I've got to create this animation for the client logo, for the little intro, and maybe even for the outro piece. And to do that, the client's going to have to provide some files, some digital files from their marketing department of their logo and the logo elements. And we need at least 2 weeks to put this together. So that goes into the scope of work. And then we just need to talk a little bit about the process. I'm going to give you 3 design variations on this. The client's going to choose one. We're going to do a revision, tighten it up. It's in the can. So that is defining a scope of work. How is the process going to work? What are the limits to that? And you can say 3 revisions or 20 revisions, but my point is you've got to define what finished looks like. It can always be better, which is the danger in content production. We're going to get it as good as we can in the budget that we have and the time that we have with the number of revisions that are available, right? And our team is very talented, so obviously this is going to be done very well. We're going to get it one try most of the time. Now, we also have in this element the Zoom recording sessions, because we got to capture all these recipients. So we've laid out how are we going to do that? Well, we're just going to record for a day. We're going to schedule everybody on Zoom. They're going to Zoom in. We're going to capture the record and then do the next one. We can knock all of those out in one day, sure. Now, this assumes that all those recipients have access to computer and internet, and also that they all show up. Again, what is the client responsible for? They're responsible for getting their people there. And oh, by the way, here's what it costs if they don't show up. Now, options. We can make them look better by giving them a capture kit, green screen, give them a ring light, a better microphone, a better camera, a little bit of lighting. We're going to have to give them an option for rescheduling recording sessions. We're going to have to give them an option for reshoots if somebody's upset with the way that they look. And if we want to add some pre-recorded voiceovers and take the live element, it's a really good idea. Take the live element out of it and pre-record the award recipients. Now we can put the whole thing in the can, and that's just an option we can add to this. We always define a final review. This is not optional. Final edits will be available for review on this date. It also gives you an end of the scope of work. Okay, definition, definition, definition. Okay, and then the delivery. What's the deliverable? The edited segments are going to be uploaded to the cloud for client and stream team use. So my team, your team gets it at the same time the client gets it. The client may have other uses for it. Okay, but when it's available for your team, is available for the client, because that means that you have now made delivery on this, right? It also means that it's much harder for them to make changes, because then the whole delivery process happens again and there is a cost to delivering. Now, let's look at how we break these elements down, because this is not a super tight scope of work, but it's pretty tight. We've got some client definition. Here's what they're responsible for. There's some limits to what we're doing. We've probably agreed on a level of fit and finish or a look and feel in there, and we can define some of that from our conversations. But for a webinar, that's a pretty tight little scope. Now, we've got to get around to pricing, okay? We've got to go through the pricing steps, and we're going to break this down into the elements. And I'm going to start with the element that would start earliest in the whole process, which is probably the 3-second animation of a logo. So I'm going to call my animator, who's probably not on your staff, a freelance animator, and say, hey, here's what we're trying to do. They're going to say, well, here are the files that I need, and I need this, and I need this. And do you want to do 2D or 3D animation? And you say, well, give me the price for both. Even though you only sold 2D, we want the price for both. And I'll show you why in a minute. How much lead time do you need? Great. I'm going to put that into my scope. We'll present up to 3 design variations, 1 revision included. They said, no. I recommend you only do 2 design variations, but let's do 3 revisions based on my experience. So you modify your scope of work that. And the animator says, yeah, for a 2D animation, if I have these files and I have this much time, it's $250. If you want to do it in 3D, it's $450. I'm not an animator. This may be total BS. The point is, ask somebody. This is now institutional knowledge for your business. You can take these estimates of cost, put them into your price book so that you can do it again. And while you have them on the phone, say, how different would this be if it was, a 10-second animation? And you start to learn what the pricing variables are and when and where does it matter. And they might say, well, you know what, really, this is the same up to a 10-second. It's really the number of elements in the animation that affects the price. It's not how long the animation runs, because I can run the animation longer. It's just a longer record, right? So, oh, great. So it's how many elements are in the animation. Where does that information come from? You were learning, you're putting it in your book of business. You now have a pre-written scope of work for the next time that you do this. Making sense? Now let's go to element B, schedule and record the recipients on Zoom. We all know that in the best possible world, you're not going to get all 10 recipients to show up on the same day. It could happen, but let's be realistic. That's not how things generally turn out. And that we also making some assumptions in here. So how am I going to price that? Well, hey, this is my team. This is what we do. This will be easy. Do not go to your rental price list, please. You need to have a price for what it takes to capture, because this is a common thing you will do over and over and over again. You've been doing it all summer and half the fall, right? I need a vMix station or OBS station or whatever it is that you use, and a technician and maybe an assistant for a full day. Here's that price for a full day. Now, if I'm going to do one at a time, I'm not dividing it by 10. We'll talk about that. I need some help scheduling all of this. It's probably the person running the vMix is not the same person who would do the scheduling. So let me put in some budget for having somebody schedule each of these people and work out all the schedule changes, and sending them email reminders and testing links and all that kind of good stuff. We've got to upload the raw files for the editor to get access to. Here's my total cost for capture. And if I'm going to reshoot, I need 20 minutes. We get somebody scheduled, we fit them in between other jobs. We'll charge them another $150 internal costs. That's your cost. We'll get to pricing in a minute. Now, element C, the scope of work says that the finished product is a logo with 3 seconds of 2D animation and a 30-second loop of 5 seconds looped 6 times, right? Now I'm going to my editor. Now, do I have an editor in-house I can talk to, or am I going to a freelance editor? Okay, you're going to have the same conversation. Here's what we want. The editor says, look, I got to process and edit a 5-second segment and loop for 30 seconds. Okay, great. How many times do I got to do it? Okay, great. Will I have all the files at the same time? Awesome. I need to add an intro animation that's coming from the animator. Okay, great. Will it be in this file format? Awesome. No problem. I want to fade to black at the end in case we get to the end of the loop. Check. Okay. So I'm going to compile those 10 individual files and upload for the client to review, make any changes that need to be changed. Yeah, I can price that for you. Okay. I'll use my editing suite. There's no audio required. Awesome. Flat fee, $600. If we have to reshoot anybody, I'll charge you $150 to re-edit somebody, or if we need to reshoot somebody and edit it or add somebody in, it's another $100. You've got some pricing parameters. You got your costs. Now you can go back in and get ready for your pricing. So here we are. We broke down all the parts and pieces to this. Okay. We have our costs. We've improved our scope of work with limitations. You know, here's where the scope ends, which is very helpful. So I can tighten up that original scope of work that I started with. Okay. Now let's make some money. Okay. I'm going to recommend for this kind of work, you start with the expectation of making a 50% margin. This means that you can absorb a fair amount of mistakes and not lose money. This means that you can be better at what you do and make even more money. And if you do 10 projects exactly like this, 2 of them are going to go south and you're going to break even. 5 of them are going to go as expected and you're going to make 50% margin. And 3 of them you're going to knock out and you're going to make 70% margin. Yay you, right? Add up the budget. I have the base cost of the animation, the capture, and the edit. This is that base scope of work that the client says at the minimum we need to do this. I price the options separately. Okay, that gives me my cost. Now I'm going to add margin to that to create a budget. Now, this doesn't have to be a precise science of just multiplying the cost times 2. you can do a little bit of rounding, right? Your goal is 50% margin, but you also want to price things believably. The hardest to believe proposals I see are the ones where everything ends in a zero. You know, $1,000 for this, $2,000 for this, $5,000 for this, $10,000 for this. Come on, folks, be a little bit creative. So I took the base scope, which if we add 50% margin costs us $3,000. The sell price should be $6,000. Okay. This is not my first rodeo. I'm going to make it $6,500. That gives me $500 to negotiate with, right? So add a little bit of a thought to how you put these prices in front of the customer. I'm also going to give the customer a budget range. So if my base scope is $6,500 and they accept all of the options and do some reshoots, they could spend $10,250. So I will present that to them. Your estimated budget is between $6,500 to $10,250, depending on choices that you make. And here are the options. Okay. So now I've got the elements of a proposal. Now I can determine how to present that to the customer. Making sense? And then things like presenter packages and green screen effect. The client doesn't understand what that means. What they do understand is if you want to make sure that everybody looks good and looks good the same way, and that nobody has their mother walking across the back of the video, or we're not looking at somebody's laundry basket, here's how we do that. So that your corporation, your association, whatever it may be, you want a consistent look. We can even put a background that is a step and repeat logo of your organization. How cool is that? Here's how we do that. Okay? So we can do the upsell very effectively if we break things out like this. Now, negotiable variables. Okay? Your enemy in all of this is unnecessary customization. Okay? If you put stuff in there that doesn't need to be done, it's eating up budget for things that might be valuable for the job. And if we want to sell the outcomes, we want to use as many stock solutions as we can with known pricing that we know that we can consistently deliver. No budget surprises on my end, no deliverable prices for the customer. If we need something that is absolutely uniquely customized, the way you write a customized quote is exactly the process we just followed. You keep breaking it down until you get to stock elements, and then you add them back up again. Okay. There's only one piece of a custom job that is actually custom, and that is the discovery and or design process. Everything else are stock items that are put together. Now, R&D is part of the discovery and design process. So if you need to do R&D, call it research and development. So we'll do research and development. Here's our fee. We will give you these results, okay? And we will apply whichever one of these that you want to your scope of work, but then we'll have to go back and budget how to deliver that. So you take them through an iterative process. So having said that, let's talk about conversing about what is negotiable, right? How to converse. So for your price for 5 to 15 segments on the thing that we just went through here, is between $5,000 and $15,000. Now, I know what you just did. You said, oh, it's $1,000 per person. That is not what I said. You did that, okay? It is not $1,000 per person because that is simply not accurate. It just happens to be a coincidence that 5 people and 15 tracks from 5 to 15,000. That doesn't mean that 4 is 4,000, and it doesn't mean that 20 is 20,000. It just happens to be in this particular case, and it's a coincidence. Now, our budget on this particular job is for 10 recipients, but if the subjects are prepared and show up on time, we could fit up to 14 in. So if you have more award recipients, I can include up to 14 in the same scope of work. And why can you do that? Because you know what your costs are, you know what incremental differences it will make, and you know that you have margin to support it, right? Now, client, if you expect multiple reshoots and rescheduling and you're hurting executives who are pulled 6 different directions or salespeople who are unreliable, then we might want to schedule 2 days of capturing instead of 1, and then we'll spend less money on reshoots. So your total spend will end up being less than us trying to do 10 individual shoots. Maybe we can get 6 on one day and 4 on the next, or 3 on the next, and only have 1 reshoot. So now we've got some negotiation points based on their comfort level with their ability to make budget based on the reliability of their people, right? And then you could say things like presenter packages will reduce the number of reshoots. Okay, so if we do a shot and you look at the background and you see the books that are on the bookshelf in the background, you go, oh my God, we can't put that out there. That's a reshoot. Why don't we just eliminate all of that and do the presenter packages? Problem solved, right? So lots of things that you can do here to make it easier to close this, get the value adds, get the things that they're going to want to add in later, get them to add it in now by optioning it effectively. Now, I talked about building a price book. Every time you get a price on something in a package like this, anytime you're pricing something and that's out of the norm for you, capture it. Write the scope of work that you can cut and paste and use again later with the cost, with the price. You can even put it into your rental management system if that's how you're used to quoting things, so that you can use it later and that everybody in your organization can sell from that same price book. Again, my goal is for you to reduce the amount of things that you think are custom. Most of what you're doing, you're going to do again and again and again. And the sooner we define it, the better we can control it, the more accurate our delivery will be, the more consistent our gross margins will be. And that means our price will be sharp. I don't have to put a lot of padding in the price if I know I can deliver it consistently, which will make you more price competitive when you need to be. Okay. And always, again, price is based on a replacement cost, not the cheapest. So if you happen to find an animator who will work for $35 an hour, and that's not your price basis, okay? Find out what the next 3 animators charge and use that instead. And if we can hire the $35 an hour guy and they do great work, awesome. But I'd rather pay $100 an hour to somebody who can get it done in an hour than somebody who's going to charge me $35 an hour and it takes them 4 hours to do it. And where is this all leading? This is all leading up to creating a killer proposal, which we're not going to get into today, right? Your proposal reflects the work that you are going to do for this customer. And whatever you do after you've gone to all this work, please do not let a spreadsheet leave your fingers and get in front of the customer. Nothing about what we're doing begs for a spreadsheet. Everything about what we're doing right now begs for a scope of work description. We're going to sell with words, big words, little prices. Okay. We don't need a bunch of line items. We need bullet points. Okay. We need lists of deliverables, not lists of tools, right? You don't go to a carpenter and say, hey, build me a cabin. He goes, well, let me see. I'm going to have to charge you for my hammer. No. Sell the end result, not the plan. Got it? So do post a few more questions here. I'll get to the couple that are here right now. Remember, our process is define your scope of work, break it down into elements, create costs for those elements, turn that into pricing, and then build that proposal with a revised scope of work that you revised as you broke the elements down and got the costs on them. And we're going to present that to the customer. So put some questions together. Bear with me for a second. Let me do the salesy thing that I need to do here. Y'all know I'm a consultant, right? I advise companies, I coach business owners. I do group coaching. I do projects for organizations. I'll help people to go, work with a team, put together the marketing plan for your company to launch your new streaming endeavor, whatever it might be. This is what I do for a living. If you want to have a better understanding of how you and I might work together, there's the link. Schedule a call. I'm happy to talk with you. No obligation. I'm going to be interviewing you as much as you're going to be interviewing me. And if we're a good fit and there's some things that might work for you that I do, I will offer them. If not, I'll be the first one to tell you that I'm not the right person for that. Now, for everybody else, if you're thinking about your proposals, after everything I just talked about, I am still doing the free proposal audit. I've got a checklist. I love looking at your proposals. I will give you some usable, instantly usable feedback to make that proposal better. Take a project that you won or lost, or a project that you have coming up, and let's make sure that we're putting the right proposal forward. I'm very interested in, if you have a proposal where the client ghosted you, that's a really good one to look at, because there's a lot of bad habits that we've developed over the years that are contributing to that. I'm looking for value you're leaving on the table. And I'm looking for anything that might hold up your deal. So if you want my many years of experience in selling value-based projects, this is free. I'll give you 30 minutes, schedule the call, send me a proposal, and let's take a look at things and see if we can't win you that next job. Which, as I said at the beginning of the hour, I talk to you guys, I see what's going on, I see what our greatest need is. It becomes the next webinar, the next blog post, or the next course. We're in a whole new world dealing with proposals on selling services instead of selling rental production. I'm ready to help you guys on that. So November 10th, I'm going to do the Jumpstart Proposal Master Class. This is a 5-week course. We're going to do an hour a week for 5 weeks. We're going to use the Intentional Success Network platform so that we can have a private group dialogue feedback. All the materials, the recordings, and the handouts are hosted there, so you can come back to them again and again. You can work at your own pace, or you can try and work in real time. I promise you will, and particularly with this course, I've built this particular course so that you can make immediate progress after every installment, every lesson. We're not building up to a finished system. You're going to make an improvement. You're going to do things immediately after that webinar is over, and you'll be excited and ready to come to the next one. So we'll work on also speaking to the buyer, how to convey value, how to accelerate the decision-making process, all the things that will help make those proposals more successful for you. So in summary, and then I'll do questions, scope, element, cost, price, proposal, right? Price anything that's unknown from scratch, but turn it into stock elements. And anytime you can get an outside cost, an example, capture it and reuse it. It just went into your toolbox. It will speed up your proposal writing process. And it won't take long at all for you to be able to sit down with a customer and say, yes, based on what you're describing, we have clients that can spend as little as this or as much of this, and here's the difference in what you get. And that's the kind of conversations we need to be having so that we can say that your best move is, why don't we go ahead and schedule that design and discovery process so we can zero in on exactly what you need. And that's moving the conversation forward rather than waiting for a proposal to do that for you. All right, let's do a couple of questions here. Let's see. Okay, there's one over here in the chat I'm going to grab first. It says, because I knew this was going to get asked, how do you please the operations and warehouse gods so that they are able to keep track of inventory and labor management and providing rack rate or package options? All right. This is a big question, but the fact is you got to sell it before operations cares. So if operations is holding up your ability to write proposals because you're checking on availability, is the studio available? Do we have people available? You've got an operational problem, not a sales problem. Call me. We need to straighten out the delivery side because right now we cannot afford to have that constraint. We are not in a rental environment. You are not running out of gear. And the only reason you haven't run out of people is because you're letting yourself run out of people. This is a fixable problem. So I'm an operations guy. I love operations. I feel their pain, but the onus is on them right now to keep up with the sales that we need to be generating. So thank you for that question. Okay, so Rusty, ignore. if you do get to this, ignore the question. Okay. What do you feel is the appetite for straight terms T&M labor pricing on the time and materials labor pricing on these projects? And also, how would you sell the customer that this can save them money if they behave over guaranteed pricing? So so a lot of production work is sold as a time and materials process. If you are an agency, if you're a creative agency, that's very often how they will sell it. But what they are doing is they are taking the customer's budget. The customer says, we've allocated $100,000 for this project. You will use that in terms of times and materials. So you will take that back, you'll take that budget, you'll divide it up between the areas that need to be done. You'll record time and materials to make sure that you're using it effectively, and it becomes the check and balance between you and the customer. I didn't present that. I had consideration for that, but that's a very sophisticated way of doing business. I don't think we're ready for it yet. I really am encouraging you to sell a not to exceed number. I think that's the skill level that we can sell right now, is tight scope of work with a not to exceed number rather than time and materials. But thank you, good question. Yes, the presentation will be available afterwards. Hopefully I remember to hit record. It'll get uploaded and posted on the replay page on my website, or more quickly on the Intentional Success Network page. What do you think about pricing the variables with a range on a proposal? I think you can do that, in which case I wouldn't necessarily call this a proposal, but you could. So you can say, hey, you, a customer, you are agreeing, you are signing an agreement in this proposal for us to do this, and the range is here based on which choices you make during the discovery and execution process. You're effectively doing the same thing if you put a contingency budget in there, which is also your range. And the nice thing about a contingency budget is that it doesn't tie it to any one area. It's much easier to see that it can move around. Once you put ranges on the 3 or 4 areas of your proposal, then there becomes the game of, well, we can save that money here and spend it over here. No one keeps up with that, and nobody remembers what trade-offs they made. It's best to put it all into a contingency budget and pass it on. So that's a pretty sharp question. Thank you for that. So says Tom, we use the same machine to deliver different results to different clients. How do we gauge our internal cost per client? I'm not sure I completely understand that. I think what's behind that question is a question that I've been getting fairly often, is how do I price something internal, like a studio where I've built a giant curved LED wall and I've got a 3-camera production suite set up, and how do I price that? Because that is a recipe of gear, okay, but this client uses it differently than that client. Do I charge them differently? I'm going to answer that question, and hopefully I'm answering the question that's being asked, but I know, Doug, you'll send me an email if I didn't. One of the things that you look at when you're pricing a studio is that it is not a rental. If we're rental production people, we're adding up all the gear and go, well, that would normally cost a week, you know, the weekly rate for that is $50,000. They're using the studio for a day. I should charge them for $10,000, right? That's not the way studio pricing works. When we're pricing rental of equipment, we're making a goal. We have an aspiration that maybe we'll get 20 days or 30 days of rental a year out of that equipment. When you're renting a studio, you're renting real estate, right? With fixtures in it. And how many days, how many weeks out of the year do you expect that to rent? And what's the rate of return that I expect to get over multiple years? If you've ever rented a broadcast video truck, one of those big, you know, trucks that cost $10 million to put together, and you're just shocked to find out that they'll rent it to you for 20 grand a week. You go, how the hell are they doing that? Well, they're expecting that truck to be working for the next 30 years. So their pricing structure is different. So I didn't fully answer your question, but hopefully we knocked a little bit of the crust off of it and get you thinking. Another question here. Great approach in seminar and learning about selling production services or creative for your participants. that haven't previously done this. Yes, thank you. That was my goal. One big part to the approach is knowing your buyer type: technical buyer, creative marketing director, non-technical buyer. I'm sure that's more that you could done. Yeah, and absolutely. And anybody who's been to any of my webinars or has been in my marketing course or my sales funnel course knows that I talk about buyer styles and buyer types all the time, probably ad nauseum. So whether if you're selling to a creative buyer, you're going to package and present a little bit differently versus a technical buyer, versus an end client who has a completely different perception of what's involved in doing all of this. So thank you for reminding all of us of that. In the proposal course, we will take that down a little bit to talk about how do I do a proposal for different types of buyers in this situation, but apply the same principles. How do you option something to a technical buyer is completely different than optioning something to an end customer. So, all right, great. So here we are on time. Thank you guys so much for being here. If you got more questions, feel free to ping me. If you're on the Intentional Success Network, please drop in there and post any questions that you have. Here's the link if you have not joined. This is our private network. It is not Facebook. There are no political ads. Matter of fact, there are no politics at all. So come join us. We can talk about our industry, share knowledge and idea. I have a ton of content there that you can consume at your leisure, including some free courses and a few paid courses. So come check it out. There's a lot of knowledge available out there for those of you who are interested. So thank you so much. We will see you next month. Thank you for being here.